Hey everybody, it's great to see you all. I'm super humbled to be here today with so many people and present some of the insights that I've picked up over the years in working as what I would call an intrapreneur. You know, an intrapreneur is a little like an entrepreneur. You know, the entrepreneurs are the ones that are starting new businesses from scratch. Then intrapreneur is doing the same thing but inside an existing legacy company or business. And so I've been spending 17 years doing that in the aviation industry, in the wind power industry, and close to 10 years at Lego. And so today I'm going to share some of the stories and insights on how to not only survive but thrive as an intrapreneur. How do you create changes and transformation in large organizations and at the same time, you know, have a great time and, you know, a fun job doing so. So I'm going to share with you what I'd call the 5 steps to building a culture of intrapreneurship. But first, let's just talk about the obvious, like why do we need intrapreneurship? Why is it that we need the large organizations to behave more like small startups? Well, the answer is obvious, and you know it all. It's the speed of change that we're seeing, right? Digitalization, sustainability, some of those key drivers that are now challenging all companies across the globe to change. And it's happening faster and faster, which means you can't just sit around and wait for somebody else to do something before you start something. And actually, many companies have a tendency to be second movers, meaning they'll sit and wait for somebody else to move and then they'll try to move in. But guess what? In the future, you won't have time to catch up. If you're not already experimenting with these things, it's going to be impossible to catch up. Which is why at Lego, we had this saying where we say, well, radical innovation is the new normal. And this was to set the mindset in the organization that we all need to understand what's happening in the future. And so what does that mean, that radical is the new normal? Well, radical innovation means that you need to do something that you've never done before. It's radical to you. And that means you have to build new capabilities. You have to understand things that you have never experienced before. And the challenge with this is that, you know, the product life cycles will get shorter and shorter. And you have less time as a pioneer to recoup on your investment. And again, as a second mover, you basically have no time to catch up. So I put some of the things up here that's affecting the toy industry. And it's all the usual suspects, right? Because what happens when toys are being empowered by artificial intelligence? Imagine the child will be able to interact with the toys that are constantly learning based on the interaction with the child. And then imagine adding robotics to this. So now the toys can behave and move in the way that a child would imagine to. And if you add voice and sound, now the child will have a meaningful conversation with the toy, one that evolves over time. And if you then add Internet of Things and now connecting all the toys, now the toys can actually be playing together. So imagine the child leaving the bedroom and the toys will still be playing. It'll be like Toy Story coming to life, right? And then on top of that, you can even empower the child through augmented reality or mixed reality to see the things they imagine happening right in front of them in their physical bedroom. And if that was not enough, then you can even empower the kids to produce their own physical toys through 3D printing, additive manufacturing. And so for Lego, you know, a non-tech company, that's going to be a challenge in the future. So despite the fact that the company is doing tremendously well, they need to build new capabilities. And if that is not even enough, yeah, they also have to replace plastics, right? So even a company so successful as Lego will have to understand how do they become a tech company in the future? How do they interact with these things? And this is not just about not getting disrupted. There's also a moral and ethical responsibility here, right? Because you can say all these technologies can do great things for kids, no doubt. Empower their creativity, make them do things they've never been able to do before. But it can also do the opposite. It can take away their creativity. It can pacify them, basically hooking them up to the matrix where they're just passively consuming digital content. And that's actually what's happening today. There's something called the torrent score that measures the level of creative confidence and ability in the population. And the latest scores among kids are the lowest ever measured, meaning the new generations of kids are less creative than any previous generation. Well, that's a huge problem, because at the same time we expect these kids to grow up and be super creative in their workspace, right? So why is this? It's basically because they're being pacified by, digital addiction. So for Lego, that's a huge responsibility. How does Lego as a company use these technologies but to enhance creativity, to improve the lives of the kids and not pacify them? So for any company, there's a moral and ethical responsibility in how do we take these technologies to actually improve human lives and not the opposite. So the right question to ask here is maybe not so much what's going to change and when, because that's very hard to foresee. And it's easy to make the wrong bet on the wrong technology at the wrong time. Just think about virtual reality. It came out in the 80s. There was a lot of investors that thought, whoa, it's going to be huge very quickly. We're still trying to figure out how do we actually use this, right? So instead, the right question to ask is, how do we put ourselves in the lead of this change? How do we as a company put ourselves in front of these changes? What is it that we want to see in the world empowered by these technologies, and not waiting for these technologies to sort of run us over? So for that reason, I believe future success for any company will be based on the ability to constantly experiment and explore with these new things. You can't plan your way out of it. You don't know what's going to happen and when, so what you can do is constantly experiment. And you sort of need to adopt the scientist mindset here, right? Because what scientists are really good at is combining new things, experimenting. What happens if we take this combine and this and combine it and boom, something unanticipated happened, right? And we all know the biggest inventions in this world came from the mistakes made by scientists. That's interesting, right? The mistakes is what led to the biggest inventions. So we need to become better at making a lot of mistakes by experimenting and exploring what's going to happen, while at the same time having our own opinion about the future that we want to build. But we also need to launch, right? It's not just enough to stay in R&D land. We need to get out, and we need to get out into the market very quickly. Otherwise, things will have moved on. And this is what startups are very good at, right? Because they don't have any resources, don't have any time, so they just need to launch a half-baked product, right? Straight into the market, figure it out, build it along the way. So what's the problem, you might ask? Why is that so difficult for larger companies, for existing companies? Why is this only something that startups can do? Because the existing companies, they have all the resources, they have all the time, all the people, all the technologies. They should be excellent at this, right? But there's a tendency here, that is that when companies grow up and grow old, they tend to stop experimenting. They sort of freeze in their existing operating model and business model, and it becomes gradually harder to do something new. And when we think about it, that's the same thing for us as human beings, right? When we grow up, we also tend to stop experimenting. We stick to what we're good at, you know? We don't want to be exposed doing something entirely new and failing at it in front of other people. So we stick to what we know, and we gradually become more and more fearing of failing, fearing of misstepping. And the same thing happens in our large companies. They have more and more invested in their brand, in their relations, etc., so they don't want to misstep or do something wrong. But in fact, we're all hardwired to experiment, right? Because as children, We did nothing but experimentation. That's the only way a child learns how to walk, how to talk, how to do anything, is through 1,000 mistakes. And when a child tries to stand up for the first time and tumbles over, the parents don't go to that child and say, well, that's a failure right there. I mean, I hope not. I hope instead they go to that child and say, well done, try again, see how you can improve your technique. And this is the same mentality we need in our companies. How can we constantly encourage our teams, ourselves, to experiment, learn through failures, many mistakes, where we're understanding new things, building new capabilities. Because kids, they have a tremendous learning curve, right? They're learning so fast because of these mistakes. We should still do that as adults. Because if we don't, we become rigid and stuck. And it can happen in our personal lives, and when it happens to large companies, it can become fatal, right? We all know the cases. So, in my opinion, radical innovation has to become a new core capability in any company. The ability to constantly experiment with what will happen in the future, what's coming next. And for that reason, you need an entrepreneurial culture, where there is entrepreneurship, where you're able to operate more like a lean startup rather than a rigid, large corporate. And that includes a shift from that innovation is only for the few people in the R&D lab to now it's something everybody needs to focus on. Because it's not just enough developing new products. You need the whole organization, the whole system to be able to deliver something new at scale. So, how to create that shift? And so for that reason, over the years, doing this work in large corporation, I built up what I call the 5 steps to building an entrepreneurial culture. What are the key 5 things you need to focus on to start on this journey and to become really, really good at it? And the first step is to be really focused. You know, there's so many things happening. There's so much going on. What should you do? And if you end up doing everything all over the map, then it won't work. The second is to be organized for agility. How can you be organized in a way where you can operate more quickly and adapt to new things? Third step is to then be more like a lean startup in the way that you execute experiments. Fourth step is to then operate also more like an ecosystem. How do you become more resourceful from collaborating? And the final and fifth step is where you as a leader, as a change maker, as an entrepreneur, need to become what I call a diplomatic rebel. I'm going to talk more about what that means. But let's take the 5 steps. The first one, being focused. And I'm always surprised when I come out to large companies and realize that for the existing business, they're super focused. But for innovation, it's like, they're all over the map. They're not really sure what to do. And the trick here is to not boil the ocean. How do you make sure that the limited resources you have are really used in the best possible way? And here I'm going to tell you a short story of this company, Lego, that I'm sure you're all super aware of and familiar with. And the story is that they are a family-owned business. They're actually 90 years old this year. They're having their 90th birthday. And it's basically based on this Lego brick, right? This piece of plastic. It was invented in 1958, as it looks today. Today is the company is tremendously successful. They actually just had the best year ever in 2021, where they grew more than 45% just in 21. So still incredibly successful. But it wasn't always so. Actually, in the 90s, the company was really struggling and was losing money every second year, and they didn't really understand why. So they pulled in some consultants that looked at it and say, well, maybe this piece of plastic, you know, from 1958 is obsolete. Maybe you should do more what the competition is doing, like robotics and action figures and, you know. So they said, okay, maybe they're right. Let's park the brick. Let's invest in other things. So they innovated sort of big bang style into new areas. And then in 2003, the company almost went bankrupt. And two things had happened. One, the company had sort of overinvested in new areas that they knew very little about, depleting all the resources, making, mistakes, yes, but big mistakes. Huge mistakes where they lost a lot of the resources. The second reason was that customers lost sight of what is Lego really about. We thought it was about the brick, but now they're all over the map, doing things in all directions. So the founders, the family saved the company and said, okay, we need to stick to the brick. We need to get back to the core and understand that. And they saved the company. And there were sort of key three things that they understood from this experience that I call building the foundation for radical innovation. One needs to be in place before you start venturing into new territory. And the first one is to really understand what mission are you on as a company? What are you trying to achieve? Don't just follow shiny objects of cool technologies. Understand why do you want to leverage these technologies? What is it that you want to create? What value do you want to create? The second step is to understand what is your brand DNA? What should be present in these new experiences? And for Lego, this was really about creativity. But they forgot that, right? So they threw away the brick and said, let's do other things. And they almost failed. The third one is to understand your core capabilities. What is it that you're really good at? And how can you leverage that when moving into new territories? Because you don't want to start from scratch. So when you have those, then you're ready to build your innovation strategy. Then you're ready to understand, okay, what are then the areas where we should invest? And to develop your innovation strategy, you need to build what at Lego we called opportunity spaces. An opportunity space is consisting of two things. The first one is an internal context analysis. That is what I showed before, the mission, the DNA, the core capabilities, really understanding where are we and where do we want to go. The second element is the external context analysis. What's changing in the world? What are the new technologies? What are the new consumer behaviors? And where these two intersect, that is where you have your opportunity spaces, where you can leverage all the power you have into this new space. And so for Lego, the DNA was this thing about system and play. They didn't really realize that before the crisis, but actually the brick system is not just a toy. It's not even a product. It's a platform, right? It's a platform upon which customers can build their own things and constantly expand. So they didn't realize that. So now they understand whenever Lego innovates into something new, it has to be based on that system. Also the element about creativity, learning through play, and the special humor of Lego are now sort of the cornerstones of any experience coming out of the company. Which is why when we innovate at Lego, we use this formula and saying, okay, we need that key DNA and new ingredients then. So everything should be obviously Lego, but never seen before. And that means the customers should be able to spot miles away that this is clearly a Lego product, but never seen before, right? But it has the DNA. It has all the things that a Lego experience should have. And that's why the company was later able to develop Lego Friends, Lego for Girls, the Lego Movie, together with Warner Brothers, but now also more technology-based experiences like the collaboration with Super Mario. And all of them are still very true to what Lego is, leveraging the powers that they have. So that's the internal context analysis. For the external, you need to start by developing empathy for the world, meaning you need to be sensitive to what's changing. And that's hard to do from an armchair, right? It's hard to do from the lab. Yes, you can read reports, but you won't really understand what is changing. Which is why at Lego, we said you need to go out where the changes are happening. And that's the reason why there's a lion on this image. Because at Lego we said, if you want to understand how the lion hunts, don't go to the zoo. You need to go to the savannah Meaning you need to go to the natural habitat of where the changes are happening. Immerse yourself in this ground zero. So we would do in-home studies, which basically meant camping out with families for a period of time. Like we did that in tier 3 cities in China to understand why are kids not spending, any time with toys in China at the time, 15 years ago. And so living there with the family for a period of time, you really start understanding what are the mechanics, the underlying currents, the values that are driving the behavior. And you get much deeper into understanding the changes that are actually happening and how you can then fit into that. And obviously that generates a lot of data. You get a lot of data, a lot of insights. And so we would organize that on what we call that direction wall. Basically having all the different insights. This is what's happening with consumer behavior, with technologies, with new business models, with new geographies. And then we would do insight clusters or pattern recognition. What if we took this technology with this customer behavior, with this new business model and combined them? And that basically becomes your opportunity space. All right, we see these things, now we combine them and they're heavily based on insights. Meaning it gives us a lot of understanding how to act into this space. So an example of 2 of the latest opportunity spaces that Lego is pursuing, it's pure digital play, for instance. Why shouldn't Lego move into pure digital play and transform that business? Again, back to the point of saying many kids are just being pacified. How could Lego help kids to be, more creative by spending time in digital experiences? The same with education. Why shouldn't Lego own the future of education? That also needs more creativity. So these are some of the areas that they are now investing in and exploring in the future. And so what this does is that it creates a very clear link between your strategy and each experiment that you're running. And as an entrepreneur, this is really important. How can you tell a good story? So imagine you have these 3 sort of mission or strategy points. Then within that, you identify some of the opportunity spaces that you have. Within each of those, you create some hypotheses, meaning your beliefs. We believe that if we do this and this, then this will happen. And then you identify some concrete experiments within each of these. So that means when the CFO is coming down and asking you as head of innovation, why the heck are we doing this? How does that make sense for anything? Now you can tell a very specific story. This is tied, to this belief, to this opportunity space that we have defined that's part of the strategy and the mission of the company. And it makes people become followers much easier to what you're doing. All right. Now let's imagine that we know exactly where we want to go. We have our opportunity spaces. We're super focused. Now how do we then organize ourselves for agility? And here I believe that future organizations will have to become ambidextrous. Ambidexterity means that you're good at using both hands equally well. It's something that's very difficult for most humans. And for organization, it means that with one hand, you need to manage the existing business really well. But with the other hand, you need to be equally well at exploring the future business. And this is where companies typically struggle. So to do that, I believe there have to be 3 levels of innovation happening in any organization in parallel. And the first level is, of course, the existing core business. Continuous improvement, optimizing what you're doing. Most companies are good at this. Level 2 is where you do core exploration. So what's the future of our core business? How might we digitize it? How might we adopt this technology? But it's still based on the same operating model and business model. The third level is where you do radical exploration. So this moves beyond your existing core. This no longer ties into your existing operating model and business model. Think about Blockbuster when Netflix came around. Everything that Netflix was doing was not linked to Blockbuster's operating model or business model, right? It was physical stores, it was physical DVDs. Now there are no stores, there are no physical DVDs, right? It changed everything. And that's why they couldn't interact with it. And the first 2 levels, you can say, can happen within the existing mothership. the existing organization. The third level, however, cannot. The reason is it's too different. It's too radical. It won't fit. If you try to fit it in, at worst, it just gets killed. Or even worse, it jeopardizes the existing business, the existing operation. So this have to happen outside. So we organized innovation at Lego in exactly this way. There's the core brick business constantly being renewed. Every year, Lego is replacing 60% of its entire portfolio. That's like the fashion industry, right? Almost replacing everything. At level 2, we had Future Lab that were constantly exploring how do we digitize the Lego brick? How do we add these new technologies to it? But still based on the brick system, the core business. At level 3, we had Lego Ventures that's now exploring the future of pure digital play, the future of education, moving beyond the existing core business. And what is important here is to understand when does which project go into what level. You don't want a radical project go into level 1, where it's going to create havoc. So we would do innovation profiling, saying how much is this project changing what we already know across business, product, communication, and process. And then we would sort of plot the project in. And you would get this innovation or risk profile, if you will. And that would determine, is this a level 1, level 2, or level 3 project? So you would put it into the right bucket where the right tools were there in place. And so for level 2, where the Future Lab was, that's where we were exploring, so what's the future of the Lego brick in a more digital world? And we were a highly multidisciplinary team. We would understand many different aspects, and we would have an end-to-end capability. This means that we could take projects from very early research in the market. We had anthropologists on the team, right? All the way into a full launch in the market. We could do it ourselves. We were not dependent on anyone else. Like a startup, they also run all the way with the product into the market. But not to be a huge team, we had what we call a skeleton structure, meaning we only had the key capabilities that we needed. Whenever we needed an expert, it was more like staff on demand. We would have to borrow or partner up with somebody who could provide those capabilities. So a very network-based organization. We were just 20 people at the core team, but like maybe 150 in our network that could help us provide solutions. So in that sense, we created innovation teams across the entire value chain, not just a big sleepy R&D lab at the middle, right? But across all functional areas, even in the support functions like legal, procurement, and finance, even there, we build innovation teams. Because what's the future of legal contracting when you're working with startups and other types? What's the future of procurement when you need to source completely different things? So very important, because this empowers agility and enables you to scale the things that you are inventing in the lab. Otherwise, they won't scale if you don't get the rest of the organization along. All right, so let's imagine now we have a clear focus. We are structured in 3 levels of innovation like Lego. Then how do we execute like a lean startup? And this starts with a mental mindset of saying, think big, but start really small. What's the smallest way we can get started? So not betting big. This was what Lego did before its crisis. It bet too big. It invested everything on one thing and lost. No, instead we want to bet small. We want to bet often, have a lot of bets, like a venture capitalist, a lot of bets, because we don't know which one will succeed. And then a long patience, right? Some things will take 10, 15 years before it's mature, right? Some technologies will not be ready just now. So how do we make sure we have this long perspective? And this can actually be challenging, because in many companies, when you want something solved really badly, you have a tendency of throwing a lot of cash at it. And with a lot of cash comes a lot of people, steering committees, SVPs, and all of a sudden you have a project that's too big to fail. Right? This is too important. We have to succeed. And that makes everybody freak out. Nobody dares to experiment. Nobody dares to fail. Nobody dares to do anything other than what they know will work. And these projects can sort of havoc through organizations for years before anybody dares to shut them down. And when they're finally shut down, it's very traumatic for everybody, right? Hundreds of people are laid off, and everybody will say, let's never do that again. So keep the project so small that basically failing is not a failure. It doesn't have a consequence. And only when you really understood all the nuts and bolts, then you scale it and make it big. So to do that, you need your teams to run more like lean startups. And a key element of this is creating prototypes rather than prototypes. So a prototype is where you pretend to have a prototype. Because if you tell an engineer or a designer to create a prototype, they think they have to make something that actually works. And that can take anything from months to years to build. No, a prototype is where you pretend to have something that works. So this is an example from IDEO, which is a California-based design agency. And they had to create an app for kids, for a client. And instead of pulling in coders and say, let's start making and building this app, they printed the iPhone on a foam board. The foam board is hanging from the ceiling. There's a hole carved out where the screen is. The guy is standing behind. She's in front. She's recording on her laptop. And when she's poking, he's responding. And in 2 to 3 hours, they recorded 3 to 4 different conceptual directions for this app. And in the subsequent hours, they had kids in to review it. And in just about 1 day, they already had some real, live, emotional input from end users to their ideas. And that's the type of speed you want to have in the initial phase of this. Don't start building it before you have some live input. The second thing we did at Lego was also install what we called a 2-week work cycle, basically operating in design sprints of 2 weeks each. That meant on the Monday of the first week, the team would formulate their hypothesis. You know, we believe that if we do this and this, then this will happen. They would create a prototype, they would test it with kids, and on the Friday of the second week, we would evaluate in the leadership team, okay, how did this go? What worked? How can you iterate and tweak your assumptions? And the advantage of that is that any team could only run in the wrong direction for maximum 2 weeks. Then they'll be confronted, say, no, the kids didn't like that, or they really loved this. And in that sense, it becomes a learning culture where the teams are constantly learning based on immediate interaction. Later on, of course, when you get a more mature product, minimum viable, launch, and again, get into market as quick as possible, but also as small as possible. What's the smallest possible way to do a pilot in the market to quickly understand how might this work? So to build this culture of entrepreneurship, I believe there are 3 key things that needs to be looked at. And the first one is, how do you give the teams autonomy? Ability to operate like they actually were startups, making their own decisions. So at Lego, we organized the teams in core teams that basically consisted of what will be equivalent to a CMO, the CTO, the COO. And they would be able to have full autonomy in driving this project all the way through. Of course, we would meet every 2 weeks to evaluate the learnings, but they would make the decisions themselves. The second is to give the teams the right tools. Don't force them to follow the stage gate model, the old slow waterfall model, right? Give them new agile tools where they can very quickly move forward. And the third one is to make sure that their KPIs, the way that they're measured, is based on their experimentation velocity. How quickly are they learning and moving on? Rather than some financial results, which we have no idea when will come, how much will come. That's not relevant in the beginning, right? So when you change the way that teams are being led, giving them autonomy, the tools they have, giving them agility, and the way that they're measured, then you change behavior. And over time, that new behavior becomes the new culture. And this thing about measuring performance, think of it again a little like a startup, or maybe even like a child. The analogy of the child that's trying to stand up, tumbles over. How can you encourage them constantly to try new things and reward them based on their ability to very quickly learn and iterate? All right, moving on now to step 4. So we have a focus now, we know where we're going, we are structured for agility, and now the teams are executing like lean startups. But how do they become resourceful? You have limited resources, right? Limited time, limited people. How do you become more powerful than you actually are? And what this is about is providing rocket fuel to these new ventures, these new innovation projects. How can you give them unfair advantages, leveraging the powers of the bigger system, but without crushing them under it? And so this is about saying, how might you open up some of the things that you're good at? And let these new projects build on top of that. And it actually means that you need to open up the silos in the organization. How can you let these new innovation projects leverage some of the powers that you have across the entire system? And the advantage of that is that as you start exposing your existing core business to these new radical concepts, they also start moving in that direction. They will start stealing with pride and understanding, how might the future of marketing be when we have this new product or service? What's the future of legal or business performance, etc.? The second thing is to then get access to assets, capabilities, and talents that you don't currently have inside the organization. How can you get access to the things that you might not have? Like Lego tried for years to recruit artificial intelligence engineers, something that never succeeded, because if you are a skilled AI engineer in California, you don't want to work for Lego, because Lego is not a tech company, right? So that was impossible. So instead we said, okay, how do we collaborate with Google, with Apple, with Microsoft, with all the companies where these guys are, and make joint projects together with them? And so here we use you can call the strategic venturing toolbox. Who can we partner with? Should we invest in these startups because they have some of the talent we need? Should we build our own new startups, or should we acquire new companies that have these talents to get access to it? And over time, this means that you are creating a vast network of external partners. And you're sort of moving from being this monolith, one entity, to more and be like multi-entity, multi-brand company. And this is what Google, for instance, did when they created Alphabet. Was moving, saying everything shouldn't fit into Google. Let's build Alphabet. Google is just one letter in that alphabet. And now there are multiple other options to do things. And so this might also be a change away from the traditional way of seeing talent acquisition. Recruiting talent in the future is going to be one of the most difficult things for companies. How to get the right talent. And by the way, the talents don't want to work in companies anymore, right? They want to be independent. So maybe instead it's about talent collaboration. Maybe you don't need to own your talent, you just need to access to it and collaboration with them. The same thing for your customers, actually. Maybe in the future you don't acquire customers, you collaborate with them. It's user participation. How can you invite them to be co-creators of your future products and services? And actually, to that point, I have an example from Lego, because we were thinking just about that. How could we invite the Lego fans, the people that love Lego, to be co-creators of our products and services in the future? So we came up with the idea of creating a crowdsourcing platform called Lego Ideas. And Lego Ideas is basically a little like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. So as a fan or consumer, you can pitch your idea on the platform. I wish Lego would make this spaceship or this car or something. But Lego won't look at it. Only the community will look at it, meaning all the other fans out there. And you need minimum 10,000 supporters from other fans and consumers before Lego will look at it. And a supporter means someone who's willing to buy the product at a specific price point if it is launched. But then Lego is committed to launching 3 to 4 projects from this platform every year in full distribution. So we presented this idea to management, and by the way, this was before Kickstarter and Indiegogo. This is like 12, 13 years ago. And they looked at it and say, well, absolutely no way. Never. 2 main reasons. One is, we already have the best designers on staff. Why should we let these adult fans, and at the time, the management had a sort of stereotypical view on adult fans of Lego, like being 35-year-old males, single, living in their mom's basement still. You know, really sort of the geeks and nerds of this world. Now we all know they are the billionaires of the future, right? But we also knew there was a large professional audience in this adult fan community. Second reason was, well, all the great ideas will now be publicly available on a website. The competitors can just come in and see what we're doing. So we got a no. We said, okay, how do we bypass this no? How do we still do it? So let's not build the platform. Let's do a small experiment, really scale it down. With least amount of time, least amount of money, least amount of resource. So we looked into the world, and again, this was before Kickstarter and Indiegogo, to see, does there already exist a platform like this out there? And there was only one place, and that was in Japan. Because Japan have a long-standing tradition for involving their end users in co-creating products within arts and crafts. So we partnered with a small design agency in Japan on a platform that's called Kuso, which means wish in Japanese. And we launched it there, and you know, it looked like something a fan would have made, so there was like an arm's length to it. And the first product to come on this platform was this Japanese-made submarine. It's called the Shinkai. It's a real submarine, the only one in the world that can go down to 6 kilometers depth underwater, manned, because of the deep seas around Japan. So it was a national pride in Japan. Everybody knew about this submarine. There were 2 movies about it. So one of the engineers that made the submarine put it on the platform and saying, I wish Lego would build this. It got the number of supporters. We launched it very quickly with 0 spending on marketing. And it became the best-selling item in Japan ever within that price point. Simply because everybody bought it. Kids bought it, engineers bought it, submarine enthusiasts bought it. So it became a massive success, and with 0 spending on marketing. Okay, so then we got the permission to build now the international platform. We sort of got management on board from this experiment. They understood, okay, you can manage it. The ideas won't really be copied by competition. And this can actually identify some interesting opportunities. And we decided to give 1% of the turnover back to the idea originator. So we launched the international platform, and we were looking for a first good idea to help us, you know, build the success of this. And we were lucky, because the first idea to come on the platform was Lego Minecraft. And Minecraft is this digital game with square blocks, a little like Lego, but digital. And at the time, there were 80 million active users, 80 active users on the platform. So we were looking for 10,000 supporters. In 24 hours, we had 400,000 supporters. More than 3 million people signed up on the platform in those first 24 hours. The servers crashed 3 times. The team was up all night. We launched it 6 months later, again with 0 spending on marketing, just 1 SKU, and it sold so well that all our big accounts, you know, Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, called our executives saying, why are you not giving this to us? This was just a small experiment in the corner of the company. Now it's become a full product line with more than 30 SKUs and been sort of in the top 3 of growth drivers for the companies in the last many years. So this really proved the case. Since then, we launched more than 30 projects from this platform. And here an example of some other ones, Back to the Future and Ghostbusters. And when we launched those, no child knew what that was, right? We do, but they didn't. And still they sold tremendously well because it tapped into this fan community of adult fans with a high conversion rate. So another big advantage was that this empowered actually users to become the marketeers. We would harvest a lot of data from the platform, and at the same time, we would empower the customers to be both the innovators, but also the promoters of these products. Later, Lego also bought Bricklink, which is the world's largest online marketplace for second-hand bricks. So now trying to build a whole ecosystem around the fan community and how to engage them as part of the core business. All right, now moving on to the final and fifth step. We have a clear focus, we're organized for agility, our teams are executing like lean startups, and we are now collaborating with our customers, our users, and the talent outside. How do we then lead personally this change? What do you do to actually have succeed as a change maker? And the problem is that this is really hard work. There's a lot of resistance to change in any organization. And in a way, you feel like, as an entrepreneur, you feel like you're fighting the immune system of that existing organization that's seeing everything you're doing as being radical and disruptive and not relevant for the future of the business. And it's hard. And in my experience, typically two things happen to entrepreneurs. Either they give up and do as they're told, yes sir, no sir, or they burn out and leave. And actually lately with the new generations, the millennials and Gen Zs, they don't even want to get started, right? They don't want to work in these companies where they get stuck in a silo somewhere with zero impact for months and months. So we're seeing the rise of the gig economy. So how do you do this? How do you not only survive but thrive as an entrepreneur? And so I created this framework that I call the 5 habits of high impact entrepreneurs. What are the top 5 things that you need to be aware of and do to have success? And the first one is to anticipate that there will be resistance. Of course there will be. It's natural human, psychology. It's the fear of the unknown. What will happen to me, my position, my power, my role if this new thing happens? And what if I'm not part of it? Or I don't understand it? All those things are creating resistance where people will say, no, no, no. We already done this, it will never work, or we shouldn't do this, or there are no resources for this kind of thing. So anticipate the resistance and then start, defueling it. Manage it. Figure out where is it coming from. How can you proactively start engaging with people that are giving this resistance and bringing them on board? But another thing that's also important is how do you build resilience in the teams? The teams need to be very resilient because they're constantly battling up against the existing system. How do you avoid them burning out? So we were seeing actually some fatigueness in our teams at Lego. So we thought, okay, which other teams out there are also struggling against the odds with some very tough missions? And so we met with a team of former Navy SEALs. Because they are pretty tough missions, right? If you think about it, when they're successful, nobody will hear about it because it's secret. And when they fail, they might be dead in a ditch somewhere. Of course, it's not that bad being an entrepreneur, but there's something about it. It can still be traumatic. So we said, what are they doing to cope with this resistance? And there was a number of things that they told us about, but one really stuck out. And that was whenever they come back from a mission, they spend a lot of time debriefing. And basically, like in group therapy, understanding what went wrong, what went well, what did we learn, why did you do this, why did he do that, and how can we improve for the next cycle. So at Lego, we created what we call safe houses. And once a month, the team will meet on a full day only to figure out how can we improve the way that we are working, how can we improve the relationship to the stakeholders that are giving us resistance. Now, moving on to the second habit, which is then mastering the rules. Because you will have to break a lot of rules as an entrepreneur. And by rules, I mean all the corporate ways of doing things. You have to use this template. You have to do things in this way. You have to follow this very lengthy, complicated process. Maybe that doesn't work for what you're doing, right? So you will have to break these rules. But before you do, understand why were these rules there in the first place. And you sort of need to master them. So you're able to both understand whose toes are you stepping on as you're moving into new territory so you can pick them up. But also to be able to tell good stories of, yes, we needed to do things in this way, but now we need to change. And so at Lego, we became what we call brand fundamentalists, meaning that we knew more about the history and the legacy of the company than anyone else. We knew everything about the near-death crisis that they had. So we could constantly tell people that would come in and say, well, aren't you doing the same thing that almost killed us 20 years ago? And we could explain to them, no, this is completely different, and these are the things that we're now doing. And because what you need to do is to build a tribe. You need to create followership. So that's the third habit. You can't do this in isolation when you're doing radical innovation. The reason is that if you do this in secret and hiding and only at the end come and say, da-da, guess what? Nobody will love it. Nobody will understand it. They'll be like, what? Why? How is this relevant to us? So you have to involve people along the way, creating followership and not seeing your project so much as a product or a project, but more like a movement. Something that's changing and transforming the company as well. So at Lego, we learned this the hard way, that it's about creating transparency and openness. And in the beginning, we actually did a mistake because we made Future Lab the most secret and closed lab in the organization. And guess what? Everybody started hating us. Because who are these people to know what the future of play is? So instead, we made it the most open lab and had bi-weekly demo days to have people in to experiment with what we were doing. Okay, I'm just going to inspect the time, just move a little forward. The fourth one is then how do you create the fellowship? And to do that, you need to create love letters. And I mean that quite literally. Be humble and respectful to people. Invite them in. Be proactive in understanding who's out there will generate the resistance. The CFO, how can you invite that person in early on to understand? So at Lego, we were actually always struggling with 3 key areas. It was finance, it was procurement, and it was legal. Because they were there to sort of maintain status quo, right? To keep the rules in place. And we were constantly breaking all those rules. So we said, instead of fighting these guys, how can we invite them in? So we created hot desks in our lab for legal, for procurement, for finance, so they could sit and work with us in the lab. And to begin with, it was only the junior people that would come in because they thought it was cool hanging out with these innovation guys. But later on, when they went back and over lunch told about what was going on in the lab, also the senior people came because they thought it was interesting to be in the know. And before we knew it, they opened up their own innovation units to be able to support us better. So they became some of our closest allies from being our severe enemies. Final and fifth habit is to then make other people shine. And besides that, it's a great thing to do. This is about creating a repetitive system, right? Because I've seen entrepreneurs that's been able to forcefully push something new through, but leaving the organization in flames and havoc. No, instead you need to invite people in so that they will come back for more next time and the following time. So make sure that everybody that was part of the project, even that CFO that tried to shut you down, is celebrated as part of this. All right, so it's about creating a balance of the spirit of the rebel with the skills of the diplomat and become a diplomatic rebel. All right, so quick overview of the 5 steps. Be focused, be organized for agility, be like a lean startup, be an ecosystem, and operate like a diplomatic rebel. Thank you, everybody.